So today we're going to talk about how to integrate the enterprise architecture lifecycle with the solution delivery lifecycle. And to do that, we're going to use a set of industry standard best practices to set the backdrop for that. So I presume many of you out there perhaps have heard of TOGAF, the Open Group Architecture Framework. And this is a framework that's freely available out on the internet for people to exploit in establishing their own internal architecture capability. And one of the great things about TOGAF is it contains 3 of the 4 key elements that you need it to establish, operate, and sustain an enterprise architecture framework. First of all, a taxonomy of the deliverables that you should think about producing during the EA lifecycle. So this is where a lot of other architecture frameworks have something to offer as well, including things such as TOGAF or other industry-specific architecture frameworks. But if you're looking for something, out of the box and you're not particularly aligned with any one of those, TOGAF has what's called the architecture content meta model to get you jump-started. One of the things that really differentiates TOGAF from some of the other architecture frameworks that are out there is that it also has a pretty great description of a method on how to actually execute the architecture development lifecycle, and that's called the ADM, and we'll be talking a little bit more about that in a little bit. And one of the third great components that TOGAF has to offer also is a skills framework, which talks about the kinds of experiences with different techniques and projects that different sorts of roles in the enterprise architecture lifecycle need to play. The fourth thing that APG feels is pretty critical towards sustaining the architecture capability is a tools framework, often built around a foundation of modeling capabilities, but also needing to consider that we need requirements management, repository management, governance, workflow, and other types of capabilities. And of course, we look towards vendor partners and open source technology to help support that part of the framework. A great thing about TOGAF is that it tries to be everything that you need to start an enterprise architecture capability without requiring you to go to other bodies of knowledge. But nicely, it has been designed with the intent that if you need to align yourself with some of these other taxonomies, particularly things like, again, TOGAF, for example, you can swap out the architecture content meta model with those alternate taxonomies. And a big part of TOGAF is the supporting community behind it, and that's called the Architecture Forum at the Open Group. And APG were members of the Architecture Forum, as are many other numbers of companies throughout the world. We meet on a quarterly basis, both in the United States and abroad, and have work groups in the intervening times. And this is where we, again, focus on refining and advancing enterprise architecture best practices and evolving the TOGAF specification moving forward. Now, as I was talking about, one of the things that really differentiates TOGAF from a lot of the other frameworks is the ADM, the Architecture Development Method. And the graphic you're seeing here is often referred to as the crop circle, and talks about, again, the kinds of activities that we want to perform in a general, certain order. This provides, again, a tested, repeatable approach towards developing architectures, again, really trying to elevate enterprise architecture to a first-class capability as opposed to a part-time hobby, as it often is practiced in less mature organizations where a lot of the activities are not planned and funded and explicitly directed. TOGAF provides a framework for kind of starting out with some of that stuff, but also gives you a path for a much higher level of capability. The activities that TOGAF talks about is focusing on establishing an enterprise architecture framework. That's a big part of what the preliminary phase is about. And then developing architecture content predominantly through phases A, B, C, and D. And then coming up with a plan that talks about how we're going to transition that target state architecture into reality by deriving a set of solution delivery projects and then governing those projects as they unfold. And so that'll be certainly something that we're going to be focusing quite a bit on in this presentation. TOGAF talks about how you want to execute the ADM through an iterative life cycle. We'll provide a little bit more clarity on kind of how we see embracing some modern agile techniques to make that happen. And, and ultimately, enterprise architecture is supposed to be trying to create an agile organization, allowing the business to be able to respond to changes that are going on in both their business and technology environments. And one of the things that APG has done to help, prop this up with a lot of our end user organizations is something called the APG TOGAF process library. And this is basically a capturing of all of the TOGAF specification in an open source platform called Eclipse Process Framework Composer, or EPF. And this represents, again, the complete TOGAF 9 standard and allows organizations to do one of the big things that's focused, talk about in the preliminary phase, namely to tailor TOGAF to a end user's organization specific requirements. And this is a big part of what we're trying to do in the preliminary phase is adapt the ADM towards our specific needs, add specific activities, remove activities, change the names of deliverables, add new taxonomies, as well as one of the critical things is integrating enterprise architecture with other life cycles. So we found, and perhaps many of you have as well, is that an enterprise architecture capability that doesn't have integration with other life cycles is going to usually degenerate into an ivory tower. So it's really important that we come up with a good understanding of how EA is going to integrate with critical life cycles such as portfolio and program management, service management, and solution delivery. And, at APG, we would say, at least from a maturity perspective, integrating EA with solution delivery is often one of the first things an organization wants to try to do as it moves up the maturity profile, since a lot of times enterprise architecture is being practiced kind of locally at the, the business unit or the solution area level, and we want to try to formalize it and bring it up to a higher level of performance by connecting it to enterprise architecture. And one of the other sets of best practices that we have, that we recommend is, again, trying to look at what a lot of people misinterpret when they look at the crop circle, which is often interpreted as a waterfall method. Namely, in order to perform it, you need to do all the activities in phase A until they're completed, and then you can start beginning phase B, so on and so forth. And in fact, there is some good guidance in TOGAF around how to apply the iterative approach to make it a little bit more of an agile life cycle. And this represents this slide here, APG's perspective on that. And the whole idea with this is that we perform the same activities often over and over again, having more emphasis on certain activities at the beginning of the EA life cycle, other emphasis on different activities towards the end of the life cycle. But one of the things that changes is not necessarily what we do, but why we do them. And so that's where we've aligned ourselves with the four-phase approach that was pioneered by Barry Boehm, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in an upcoming slide, where we have the idea that, we have to do a set of activities to initiate this version of enterprise architecture development. We then need to do a set of activities to stabilize the architecture and requirements, then focus on producing a clear description of those target architectures, and then finally transition out of formal EA development and get back into EA operations, or of course potentially start another EA development cycle. The idea behind this is that we also want to begin deploying the architecture a little earlier than you might think by looking at the ADM crop circle, and that's again really the focus of phase G, implementation governance. And so we'll see on some upcoming slides on how one of the key capabilities in making enterprise architecture agile is to trying to release the target capabilities as soon as possible to the primary consuming audience, which is the solution delivery community. So as we're going through the different phases of the life cycle, again, some people may find the previous slide and some of these words similar to information that's been captured in the Rational Unified Process. Again, Rational actually got that content from Dr. Barry Boehm at USC Berkeley in a paper he wrote in 1995 around anchoring the software process. And so in the first phase, we call an initiation. We're really trying to understand the problem that we're trying to solve.